Hello there. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it where you are? Now, close your eyes and listen closely to the tale of the curse of the Vintimore clock. It was a cold and blustery March morning when Sherlock Holmes stood at the window of our shared Baker Street apartment, pipe in hand, gazing thoughtfully into the murk. The coals in the grate sputtered and hissed, fighting against the damp chill. I.D.R. John Watson sat in my armchair nearby, nursing the last dregs of tepid tea. Holmes, I had noted over the years, had a particular sensitivity to atmospheric conditions. Stormy days often brought forth either brooding introspection or a feverish burst of activity. This morning, it appeared to be the former. "You're unusually quiet today, Holmes," I ventured. He turned slowly, lifting an eyebrow. "Do you hear that, Watson?" "I hear only the wind and the occasional bellow from Mrs. Hudson in the kitchen." "Precisely," Holmes said, turning back to the window. "That wind is an easterly. And the morning paper contains not a single incident of interest. When a storm stirs the air and crime takes refuge in warmth, the result is monotony." He had scarcely finished speaking when a firm rap echoed at the door. Holmes' face lit up with sudden energy. "Come in," he called before Mrs. Hudson could reach it. The door opened to admit a tall, rugged man wrapped in a greatcoat, his boots still wet with rain. He carried a battered leather satchel and bore the look of one who had traveled hard and long. He was middle-aged, with a weather-worn face and keen, troubled eyes. "You are Mr. Holmes?" he asked, removing his hat. "I am," Holmes replied, extending a hand. "And this is my associate, Dr. Watson. Please, sit by the fire. You look as though you've crossed all of Scotland to reach us." "Not far from it," the man said, settling wearily into the chair. "My name is William Hawthorne. I'm the estate manager of Vintimore Hall in Cumberland. I've come on behalf of Lady Eugenia Trevelyan." "Ah, the Trevelyans of Vintimore," Holmes murmured. "Old family. Wealthy. Ancestral ties reaching back to the Plantagenets, if I recall correctly." "Indeed, sir. But wealth and lineage don't shield one from trouble." "What sort of trouble?" Hawthorne leaned forward, his voice lowering. "A curse, Mr. Holmes. Or so it would seem. 3 deaths in as many weeks. All seemingly natural, and yet—" "Go on," Holmes said, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "It began with Lady Eugenia's nephew, Mr. Percy Trevelyan. A healthy young man of 28 fell dead in the drawing-room without a mark on him. A week later, the butler, Mr. Reeves, who had been with the family for 30 years, collapsed and died while winding the Vintimore clock. Just 4 days ago, the housemaid, young Mary Linton, was found lifeless at the foot of the grand staircase." "Has a doctor examined the bodies?" I interjected. "Yes, sir. Dr. Altham, the local physician. He claimed heart failure in each case, though none of the victims had any history of ailment." Holmes stood abruptly and crossed to the fireplace. "This Vintamore clock you mentioned, what is it?" "A monstrous old grandfather clock. Stands in the entrance hall. Built in 1712, hand-carved and fitted with a peculiar mechanism. A family heirloom. But there's long been talk of it being cursed." "Of course there has," Holmes said with a flicker of sarcasm. "Does the clock function properly?" "In the mechanical sense, yes. But Lady Eugenia swears that each death was preceded by the clock chiming at a time it should not have, twice at midnight, once at 3 a.m., and the last time no chime at all." "Fascinating. Do the locals believe in the curse?" "More than is healthy, I'd say. We're short-staffed now, servants have begun to flee. Lady Eugenia is desperate. She fears she may be next." Holmes turned to me, his eyes alive with purpose. "Watson, pack your bag. We leave on the noon train for Cumberland." The train rattled through northern moorland, passing low hills that sloped into fog-shrouded valleys. Outside, the trees were bare-limbed and bent like mourners in the wind. Holmes had hardly spoken since we departed Euston. He sat with his hands steepled under his chin, eyes half-lidded. I knew this expression. His mind was already at Vintamore, sifting through possibilities. At Penrith Station, we changed to a smaller branch line that wound through increasingly remote countryside. William Hawthorne, our stoic guide, rejoined us on the platform. From there, a hired trap took us the final 6 miles to the estate. As we crested a hill, the house came into view. A vast grey stone mansion hunched at the edge of a black lake, its many chimneys and gables rising like claws into the slate sky. An air of desolation clung to it. Even in daylight, the place was grim. "Vintamore Hall," Hawthorne said quietly. We were received at the entrance by a skeletal man in dark livery who introduced himself as Mr. Creel, the footman. He led us through the echoing main hall, past massive oil portraits and towering bookshelves, until we reached a high-ceilinged drawing-room. There, seated beneath a great stained-glass window, was Lady Eugenia Trevelyan. She was a commanding presence, tall, angular, and white-haired, with sharp cheekbones and piercing grey eyes that reminded me of a hawk's. She greeted Holmes with a cold dignity and nodded to me without warmth. "You'll forgive me, Mr. Holmes," she said, "if I appear skeptical. The situation is grotesque, yes, but I do not believe in superstition. Nevertheless, 3 are dead, and reason has failed me. I have no choice but to hope that logic may yet prevail. That is why I am here," Holmes said, bowing slightly. "I understand there is a great deal of local folklore surrounding this house and a particular clock." She gestured to the hall behind her. "The Vintamore clock has stood there since the reign of Queen Anne. It chimes once every hour, except at midnight, when it chimes 12. Or rather, it did. Lately, it seems to chime at its own choosing. Twice at midnight one night. 3 times at some ungodly hour the next. And then nothing at all. Each time death follows, Holmes asked to inspect the clock immediately. We followed him into the grand hall, where the monstrous timepiece loomed against the far wall. It was indeed a thing of dread. 8 feet high, carved from blackened oak, with brass serpents writhing up its columns. The face was elaborately painted with celestial symbols and Roman numerals. Beneath it, a brass pendulum swung like a heartbeat. Holmes examined it closely, running a finger along the casing, then tapping gently at various points. He opened the clock's lower compartment and peered inside. "Watson, observe," he called. "Come here. What do you make of this?" I bent to look. Inside the compartment, hidden behind the pendulum shaft, was a small metallic capsule no larger than a snuff box, affixed with a fine copper wire. "A mechanism of some kind," I said. Holmes nodded. "Too fine for the original design. Recently installed. Possibly electrical." Lady Eugenia, who had stood silent till now, exclaimed, "Impossible! No one but the butler ever touched that clock. And he's dead." Holmes stood and closed the compartment with care. "Then we must consider that someone else has had access, perhaps with means both cunning and invisible." That evening, Holmes and I were shown to adjoining guest rooms in the East Wing. The corridors were dimly lit, and more than once I thought I heard whispering just out of sight. The atmosphere of the house weighed upon me. Holmes, however, was invigorated. After a modest supper, we retired to the library with Hawthorne to discuss the timeline in detail. "You said Percy Trevelyan died first," Holmes began. "Yes," Hawthorne confirmed. "He'd just returned from a year in Cairo. Was healthy, vigorous. He collapsed suddenly while reading. The doctor found no cause, just like the others." "Was he alone when it happened?" "No. Lady Eugenia was present. So was Miss Lorna Hargrave, her companion, and myself." Holmes scribbled rapidly in his notebook. "And the butler, Mr. Reeves, died how long after?" 6 days. He was winding the clock, as he did every Saturday evening. I found him myself, flat on his back, eyes wide open. The clock had just struck 3. And Mary Linton. She had just dusted the grandfather clock, then went to tidy the stairwell. A minute later, dead. No wound. No fall. Just dead." Holmes sat back, eyes closed. "What do you think, Holmes?" I asked. "I think, Watson, that this house is a theatre, and someone very clever is directing the play. And I intend to pull down the curtain." The morning after our arrival dawned grey and dismal. Holmes had risen before me and was already out inspecting the grounds when I descended to breakfast. I found him in the garden, pacing near a row of dead rosebushes that edged the eastern wall. "Notice anything peculiar about the estate, Watson?" he asked as I approached. "Aside from the general aura of impending doom?" "Not yet." He pointed to the ground. "Footprints. Or rather, the absence of them. These beds should be crisscrossed with the tracks of servants, groundskeepers, gardeners, but they are untouched. Neglect, perhaps, or fear. Inside, the household remained subdued. Lady Eugenia stayed in her rooms. Miss Lorna Hargrave, her companion, offered to show us the private chapel, which lay in the west wing. Lorna was a woman of about 30, pale and delicate, with auburn hair and a voice that seemed too soft for this ominous place. As she led us through the shadowy corridors, I asked gently, "You've been with Lady Eugenia for long?" "3 years," she said. "She's a hard woman, but not cruel. She's simply surrounded by death." "You don't believe in the curse?" "I don't know what I believe anymore, Doctor. This house changes you. You begin to hear things, see things. I wake in the night and swear I've heard the clock chime in my dreams." Holmes was silent, his eyes fixed on her as she spoke. In the chapel, the air was cold and dry. A pale shaft of light fell across the altar, revealing a fine film of dust. "Has this room been used recently?" Holmes asked. "Not since Mr. Reeves died. The staff are too frightened." Holmes moved quickly to the organ against the far wall. "Watson, look here." The organ side panel was ajar, and inside Holmes pulled out a length of copper wire, identical to the one we'd seen in the clock. "Who else has access to these rooms?" Holmes asked Lorna. "Only the family and Mr. Hawthorne." When she left us, Holmes leaned in. "Electrical wiring in both the chapel and the clock. I suspect a link between them. Someone has installed a mechanism, one that may mimic supernatural effects. This is murder, Watson. Calculated and precise." Back in the drawing room, we found Hawthorne studying a ledger. Holmes wasted no time. "Mr. Hawthorne, are you aware of any electrical work being done in the house?" He looked surprised. "None that I approved. We're not wired for electricity beyond the kitchens. Yet someone has been wiring devices." "You've seen no outsiders?" "Only Miss Hargrave's cousin. He visited briefly last month. A Mr. Felix Carradine. Strange young man, tinkerer. Had a fascination with mechanisms." "Ah," Holmes said softly. "And where is he now?" "Gone back to London, I believe." Holmes turned abruptly. "We'll need to telegraph Lestrade in London to find him. But first, I want to test a theory tonight. Watson, we are going to stay up and listen to that clock." That night, we took our positions. Holmes seated himself across from the clock, eyes unblinking. I dozed in an armchair, revolver in hand, feeling more like a sentinel than a doctor. The wind howled beyond the stone walls. Midnight approached. The clock struck once. Then again. Then silence. Suddenly, a sound, a soft hiss, as though from a distant corner of the hall. Holmes sprang up and moved behind the clock. He pressed his hand to the wooden panel and twisted something hidden from view. There was a faint click. "Come, Watson," he said. Quickly. He led me through a hidden service door behind the clock. The passage beyond was narrow and damp, lit only by Holmes's lantern. After 20 feet, we found a recess where an object hummed faintly. Holmes pointed to a small metal box affixed to the wall. "An induction coil," he said. "And look!" Connected to a series of wires running through the clock casing and, I dare say, through much of the house. I was stunned. But what for? He tapped the box. "Electromagnetic pulses, Watson. Perhaps time to trigger cardiac arrhythmia in susceptible individuals. With precise timing and fear as a catalyst, it could explain all 3 deaths." A sudden noise behind us made us whirl. Standing at the end of the corridor, pale as a ghost, was Miss Lorna Hargrave. I followed you," she stammered. "I heard footsteps." What is this?" Holmes stepped forward, calm and deliberate. "Miss Hargrave, do you know anything about this device?" She shook her head. "No. But I recognize it. I've seen one like it in my cousin Felix's workshop in Islington." By morning, the mystery had grown taut as a wire under strain. Holmes telegraphed Inspector Lestrade with precise instructions: locate Felix Carradine. Residence, Islington. Interests, engineering, horology, electrical experimentation. Question regarding visits to Vintermore Hall. Lady Eugenia had taken breakfast in her room and refused all visitors. Miss Hargrave appeared pale and distracted, and Mr. Hawthorne was increasingly anxious. Holmes, however, was in his element. "I believe," he said as we paced the long gallery, "that we are dealing with an invisible weapon, an instrument of death cleverly disguised as coincidence." "You still suspect Carradine?" "Strongly. He has both the technical skill and the motive. His cousin lives here, potentially heir to the estate if something were to happen to Lady Eugenia. The clock, the induction device, and the timing of the death suggest a mind working with precision." He paused before a portrait of Lord Trevelyan, an ancestor painted with severe features and an iron gauntlet. "But the manner of death," I said, "seems untraceable. Even if Carradine built the device, how was it triggered?" "That," Holmes said, "is what we must discover before someone else dies." Later that day, Holmes asked Hawthorne to take us to the old servants' wing, now mostly unused. "I want to examine the original blueprints," he said. "You mentioned earlier the house has a chapel, a gallery, and multiple concealed passages. I believe the mechanism has been threaded through these forgotten arteries." The wing was a cold, disused warren of stone corridors and padlocked doors. In a musty archive, we found a set of rolled architectural plans, yellowed with age. Holmes laid them flat on a work table, smoothing them carefully. "There," he said, tapping the blueprint. "The chapel connects to the library via a crawl space behind the organ chamber. And the clock, see this passage? It leads to the back wall of the hall. And here, I said, pointing, there's another stairwell connecting the upper rooms with the back of the pantry. Excellent. That would allow someone to move unseen, adjust devices, retrieve wires, observe victims, without ever being noticed. We followed the route from the servants' archive up through the hidden stairs. The passage walls were rough and crumbling. More than once we had to stoop to avoid low beams. Halfway up, Holmes stopped and motioned me to silence. Listen. A faint metallic click echoed from above. Holmes extinguished his lantern, plunging us into darkness. We crept forward, and soon reached a narrow slit, barely a finger width wide, that gave a clear view of the drawing room below. Miss Hargrave was seated by the fire. Across the room, a tall figure approached silently. "Carradine," Holmes whispered. I peered through. The man was gaunt and hawk-nosed, with ink-stained fingers and a pale complexion. He approached Lorna and spoke too quietly for us to hear, but her reaction was unmistakable: shock, then distress. Carradine took something from his coat, a small black box, and handed it to her. She resisted, shaking her head. He pressed it into her palm and pointed upward, toward the very spot where we now crouched. Holmes stepped back. He knows about the passages. He may even know we're here. We retraced our steps, careful not to make noise. Back in the open corridor, Holmes turned to me with rare urgency. We must confront him. Tonight. That evening, as a storm began to lash the windows, Carradine was seated in the library. Holmes entered first, I close behind. "Mr. Carradine," Holmes said mildly, "a word, if you please." Carradine stood, his eyes narrow. "Mr. Holmes, I'd heard of you. Didn't expect a visit. Your cousin has kindly informed us that you are an inventor, that you were here shortly before the deaths began, and that you left something behind." "I left nothing. I built nothing." Holmes took a step forward. "We have found an induction coil. Wires concealed behind the organ. Devices hidden in the clock and chapel. Would you care to explain them?" Carradine's face flushed. I did experiment. Only small things. A clockwork bird for Lorna. An electrified bell. Nothing dangerous. You left a device that has killed 3 people. That's a lie. Holmes withdrew a small pocket tool from his coat and held up the copper wire from the organ. "Do you deny having worked with this gauge?" Carradine's eyes darted toward the door. I won't say another word. I want a solicitor." Holmes moved quickly. "Watson, if you'll be so good, lock that door." I did so. Holmes turned back. "You're not under arrest. But you are in grave danger. The killer, if it is not you, may wish to silence you as well." Carradine hesitated. Then he slumped into the chair. "All right," he whispered. "I did install the wiring. but not to kill anyone. I was testing a resonance coil, something that could create a hum in the walls. Just sound. A prank, really. I didn't know anyone would die. Who else knew? No one. I told no one. But the night before I left, someone had been in the clock. I could tell. Who? He shook his head. I never saw. But someone knew. The storm that night was biblical. Thunder cracked across the sky as if the heavens themselves condemned what lay hidden within the stones of Vintermore Hall. After Carradine's confession, Holmes instructed him to remain under watch in the library. Mr. Hawthorne reluctantly agreed to sit guard, armed with a revolver and strict orders not to leave under any circumstance. Holmes and I retired to the drawing room to strategize. "There is a deeper plot at play here, Watson," Holmes said as he paced. "Carradine is no murderer. He is vain, irresponsible, and misguided, yes, but incapable of orchestrating a triple homicide. Then who did exploit his device?" Holmes stopped. Someone with access to his modifications. Someone who knew about the secret passages. Someone with a motive buried deeper than inheritance. We heard a sudden crack. From the far corridor, a door had slammed. Holmes sprang into action. "Come, Watson." We rushed through the gallery and into the eastern passage, where the Vintermore clock stood motionless, its pendulum still, its face unreadable in the flickering gaslight. Something was wrong. Holmes crouched beside the base and opened the lower compartment. Inside, the copper wires had been snipped. "Sabotage," he muttered. But by whom? And why now? At that moment, a cry echoed from above, a woman's voice, shrill and urgent. We ran for the staircase. The cry came again, this time from the old nursery in the North Tower. When we burst through the door, we found Miss Hargrave collapsed against the wall, her eyes wide with horror. He was just there as she sobbed. In the mirror. We turned, and Holmes examined the mirror, a tall, full-length pane warped with age. Nothing unusual. "Miss Hargrave," he said gently, "what exactly did you see?" "A man. Wearing a dark coat. He had wires in his hand. He was staring at me through the glass." Holmes turned back to me. "Not a vision, Watson. A reflection. Someone was behind her, inside the passage." We searched the room and soon found a panel loose behind a wardrobe. It opened to another corridor, narrow and pitch-dark. Holmes raised his lantern and gestured for silence. We crept forward. The passage terminated in a grated alcove just behind the chapel. A figure stood there. Holmes raised the light. It was Creel, the footman. He turned, eyes wild, and bolted down a side corridor. We gave chase, our footsteps echoing in the stone. He was fast, but Holmes was faster. They collided at the end of the passage. Creel went down hard, and Holmes pressed a knee to his chest. "Enough," Holmes said. "This charade ends now." Creel spat blood and laughed bitterly. "You don't understand. You'll never understand." "Oh, I understand more than you think. You accessed Carradine's wiring. You used the clock to frighten, to manipulate, and to kill." "I only gave them what they deserved," Creel hissed. Holmes's face darkened. "3 people are dead." "They were monsters, all of them," Creel snarled. Percy, with his whips and his secrets. Reeves, who watched but said nothing. And Mary, sweet Mary, knew the truth but wouldn't speak it. Holmes stood slowly. "So you took justice into your own hands." Creel looked past him, eyes wild. "No, not justice. Cleansing. The house remembers. It wants to be cleansed." We brought Creel to the study, where he sat, bound, under guard. Holmes spent the next hour tracing the final lengths of wire and confirming that the device had been fully disarmed. Lady Eugenia summoned us at dawn. Her expression was grim. "Creel has confessed," she said. "Said he built a device to deliver fatal shocks. That he timed them with the clock to terrify his victims." Holmes nodded. "He used the legend of the Vintimore clock as a cloak. Superstition made the murders appear unexplainable. A clever illusion. And my family," she said softly, "is destroyed." Holmes said nothing. The wind howled against the windows. I took her hand gently. "Perhaps not destroyed, but changed. And truth, however dark, is better than fear." Creel was handed over to the local constable by mid-morning, unrepentant to the last. As he was led from the manor in irons, the residents of Vintimore watched in silence, Lady Eugenia with her back straight, Hawthorne grim, and Miss Hargrave clutching her shawl like a lifeline. The storm had passed, but a residue of dread still lingered in the air. Holmes and I returned to the drawing room, where the Vintimore clock now stood disarmed and silent. 3 deaths, Watson," Holmes said, standing before the device. "Each tied to the fear it instilled." "You believe fear was the trigger?" "In part. But more precisely, I believe the coil emitted an electromagnetic pulse, a pulse harmless to most, but deadly to the vulnerable, especially when combined with acute panic. It is not so different from lightning striking a man with a weak heart. Creel couldn't have built that device himself. No. He modified Carradine's design. Improved it in subtle but deadly ways. He turned toward the fireplace, where a cinder still smoldered. "But even now, Watson, something does not sit right with me." "How so?" "Consider Creel's motives. He claimed revenge for the sins of the family. But his method was elaborate, almost theatrical. The use of the clock, the spectral timing, the electrical triggers. All that requires a kind of intellect that his profile only partially matches. You believe someone else was involved. I believe someone else influenced him. Goaded him. provided the technical expertise he lacked. He paused. And I suspect I know who. Later that day, Holmes asked Miss Hargrave to join us in the library. She entered hesitantly, her face pale but composed. "Miss Hargrave," Holmes began gently, "I must ask you once more about your cousin." She nodded. "Felix never meant for anyone to be harmed." "I swear it." "I believe you. But I think Felix was used. Manipulated. There are footprints of another mind in this case." She frowned. "Whose?" Holmes opened a leather-bound journal he had retrieved from Creel's room. Creel kept meticulous notes. And there is a reference here to a certain Rel. Someone who encouraged the experiment and offered guidance. That is not Felix. That is you, Miss Hargrave. Her eyes widened. "You think I?" "I think you knew more than you let on. I think you encouraged Felix to bring his prototypes here. And I think you helped Creel install the devices after Felix left." Her voice trembled. "Why would I do such a thing? You told me yourself, this house changes people. But it didn't change you. It revealed you." Her silence was answer enough. "I had no idea Creel would kill anyone," she whispered at last. "He was passionate. I only wanted him to frighten them. To shake them. To break them. Because of what they did to Mary Fallow." "Yes," she said bitterly. "She was my friend. And she died screaming." "Lady Eugenia's late maid," I murmured. "The one who jumped from the balcony." "She didn't jump," Lorna said. "She was driven. By Percy's cruelty. By Reeve's silence. By the poison of this place. I begged Eugenia to intervene. She turned away." Holmes nodded solemnly. "So you became the hand of justice." She stood. "I never wired anything. That was Creel. I just showed him where the secrets were. Helped him build the legend." Holmes was silent for a moment. "Then, you will come with us to Scotland Yard. I believe the court may show mercy. But not if you run." She gave a brittle, exhausted smile. "I won't run. I'm too tired." Later, as we prepared to leave Vintermore Hall, Lady Eugenia summoned us to the music room. She looked smaller than I remembered, less imposing, more human. "I suppose the house is mine again," she said. "Yes," Holmes replied. "Though what remains of it may be less than what you imagined." She looked toward the clock. "I will have it destroyed." "That would be wise," Holmes said. "It has ticked too long through too much grief." Outside, the wind stirred the trees, and dawn broke over Vintermore. As our carriage rolled away, I looked back at the manor, its silhouette stark against the grey horizon. "You were right, Holmes," I said. "It wasn't a ghost. It was guilt." Holmes gave a rare, wistful smile. "And as ever, Watson, guilt leaves a more haunting echo than any spirit. The long journey back to London was made in near silence. Holmes kept his gaze fixed on the landscape outside the carriage window, eyes vacant but alert. I knew the look well. His mind was at work, turning over the final pieces of the mystery, as if examining them one last time to be certain of their shape and consequence. At last, as the city skyline loomed, he spoke. "I underestimated the depth of Miss Hargrave's cunning," he said. "You think she was the true architect?" "In emotional terms, yes. But it was a symphony composed by many hands. Carradine provided the instrument, Creel the performance, and Hargrave the conductor's baton." "You're unusually poetic." He smiled faintly. "Murder, Watson, is a kind of opera. Each participant plays a part in a crescendo toward death. In this case, what struck me most was not their coordination, but how each believed themselves justified. She will be tried." "Yes." "Likely convicted, though the court may weigh her role as accessory rather than principal actor. She never placed a hand on the devices, after all. She only whispered the idea." "And Carradine?" "He will be ruined by association, but spared the law. His guilt is intellectual, not criminal. The flaw of a man too clever for his own conscience." We arrived at Baker Street to find a pile of correspondence on the mantel, a half-finished monograph on rare fungi in the corner, and a light misting of ash over Holmes's violin case, evidence of Mrs. Hudson's ongoing war with London soot. Holmes lit a fire and made tea with his usual economy of motion. "I will write to Mycroft," he said, "and to Lestrade. The official report will be delicate. Lady Eugenia's influence still holds weight in certain quarters." I nodded and settled into the armchair. "And what of the clock?" I asked. "Will she truly destroy it?" Holmes leaned back and steepled his fingers. "That remains to be seen. But its power has already been broken. The myth now lies exposed. A machine, not a curse. A mechanism, not a ghost." To my surprise, a sealed envelope arrived bearing the Vintimar crest. It was addressed to Holmes, but he tossed it to me with disinterest. "Lady Eugenia," he said. "Read it aloud, will you?" I opened it and began, "Mr. Holmes, the clock has been dismantled, as promised. The parts were melted and the ashes buried in the family crypt. Vintimore Hall is quiet again, though perhaps not at peace. Miss Hargrave was taken without resistance. I shall not speak for her motives, only acknowledge that guilt now lives in many rooms. You asked what remains. The answer, I believe, is silence. The kind that lingers not in absence, but in aftermath. My thanks." Eugenia Vintimore Holmes closed his eyes briefly, then said, "She writes like a mourner at her own funeral. There's something noble in it. There's something lonely in it." He stood and moved to the window. Outside, London rolled on, its bells, its fog, its endless pattern of shadow and motion. "Do you think," I asked quietly, "that any good came of this case?" "Yes," he said without turning. "The truth came out. That's all justice is, light in a very dark corridor." He was silent for a while. Then, almost absent-mindedly, he added, "And perhaps, in time, someone will remember the sound of that cursed clock and hear nothing." Several months passed. Then, one grey afternoon in late autumn, a small package arrived at Baker Street. Holmes, having just returned from a case in Chiswick, opened it without ceremony. Inside was a pocket-sized bell, silver-plated, with delicate etching along its rim. A card was enclosed. "To Mr. Holmes, I once told you I was no murderer. That was true, but incomplete. My invention was never meant for harm, but I now see what harm silence permits. You force me to confront what I chose not to see. This bell is tuned to a frequency identical to that of the old clock. But it has no power. It does not kill. It only chimes. I made it as an apology." Felix Carradine Holmes held the bell up to the light. Then he gently rang it. The sound was thin, pure, haunting. A single chime, like memory echoing down a long hall. He placed it on the shelf beside his violin case. "No power," he murmured. "Just the note." He turned back to his papers, the sound of the bell still hanging in the room, fragile and final. Several months passed in uneventful quiet. Holmes busied himself with small cases, missing pets in Belgravia, a fraudulent art dealer in Soho, the usual ebb and flow of London's criminal eccentricity. But I could sense the Vintimer case had not quite left him. He often lingered at the shelf where Carradine's silver bell now rested. Sometimes he would ring it, once, no more, and stare at it as if trying to read in the note something that words could not hold. Then, one morning, a curious package arrived. It bore no return address, and was wrapped in coarse waxed paper. Inside was a sheaf of yellow documents, sealed with a broken red ribbon. The hand on the envelope was unmistakably old, shaking, likely aged by arthritis or illness. There was a note, Dr. Watson, if you are reading this, then the house is truly silent at last. These are the private papers of Elias Reeves, former steward of Vintimore Hall. I have kept them hidden since his death, not out of loyalty, but fear. They belong to history now. A friend. Holmes snatched the note and examined the handwriting. Anonymous, but female. Judging by the slant and ink blotting, Miss Hargrave, I would wager. Writing from custody, no doubt. We examined the bundle. The top sheet was a diary entry, dated March 3, 1882, some 13 years prior. Lady Eugenia has called off the wedding. Mr. Percy is enraged. He paced the drawing-room for hours, red in the face, muttering about betrayal. I believe it has something to do with the incident in the chapel. The girl, Mary, is frightened. I heard her crying again behind the linen stores. I fear this house is not safe for her. Another entry. Weeks later, I confronted Percy. He laughed. He enjoys the game. Watching her fear grow. He says that clock will decide her fate. I have no idea what that means. Holmes turned to me, his brow deeply furrowed. Watson, this isn't just documentation. It's evidence. Of what? He read aloud. The family clock has always fascinated Percy. He used to tinker with the housing, the bell tones, the gearwork. Once, he told me the vibrations could resonate with the soul. Nonsense, of course. But I've since noticed wires leading from the base to the old choir pit. How he ran them through stone, I cannot guess. Holmes leaned back. So Percy was the first to modify the clock. Not Carradine. That blasted mechanism has been a tool of power for over a decade. And Mary Fallow? Holmes flipped pages until he found the relevant passage. She knew. She saw something, perhaps the wires, perhaps Percy himself. He threatened to show her the hour. I warned Lady Eugenia, but she said only, "The less I know, the less I must answer for." 2 nights later, Mary was dead. There was silence between us. Reeves documented it all, I said softly. Yes, Holmes said. And did nothing. He closed the papers with finality. Now we understand Creel, he continued. Not as an originator, but as a continuation of a cycle. The house was already poisoned. Creel simply stirred the cup. And Lady Eugenia. Holmes said nothing for a long moment. Then, she was complicit through silence. Hargrave through manipulation. Carradine through carelessness. Creel through violence. And Percy through cruelty. Every layer of that house was soaked in shadow. We sent the papers anonymously to Scotland Yard. I later learned they were quietly archived, too politically dangerous to prosecute, but not ignored. A sort of unofficial reckoning. That night, Holmes stood at the fire with Carradine's bell in hand. He rang it once more. One chime, he said. Not a death knell. A warning. He placed it back on the shelf, then turned to me with the faintest smile. Come, Watson. I believe we've earned an evening without ghosts. By early December, London streets had frozen into crisp white stillness. The city moved more slowly, carriages crunching over frost, breath visible in lamplit clouds. Holmes had taken to long walks through Regent's Park, his hands clasped behind his back, deep in contemplation. I knew the signs. Though the Vintimer case had officially ended, the shadows it left behind were still stirring. One afternoon, as we returned from a walk, Mrs. Hudson handed Holmes a telegram. He read it silently, then passed it to me. Sent from Whitechapel Station, the 14th of December, 3:17 p.m. regarding recent clock murders. Another death. Man electrocuted in room without current. No sign of device. Stop. Marked on wall in soot, 2 bells to stop. Please advise. Inspector G. Lestrade. Holmes read it again over my shoulder. 2 bells. Do you think it's connected? I asked. Holmes didn't answer at first. He turned and slowly climbed the stairs to his room. I followed, uneasy. Inside, he removed the small carradine bell from the mantel. It looked innocent, even delicate. He turned it in his hand. This is no longer just about Vintimo, he said. The legend has spread. He packed quickly and sent a reply wire to Lestrade. We arrive within the hour. The scene was unsettling. The deceased, a man named Roland Pike, was found dead in his rented flat. No wounds. No burns. Yet his body bore the same signs of cardiac disruption as the victims at Vintimo. No electrical outlets were in use. No generator. Just the soot-smeared message on the wall, 2 bells. Lestrade was waiting, arms folded and visibly uncomfortable. I don't like it, Holmes. Feels like superstition again. Superstition never leaves fingerprints, Lestrade, Holmes replied. But clever murderers do. We searched the premises thoroughly. Holmes examined the ceiling, the floorboards, even the small brass fixtures near the windows. After an hour, he held up a scorched length of fine copper wire, almost invisible against the brown skirting board. Hidden in the walls, he murmured, "Run behind the plaster." Someone is recreating the Vintimo mechanism, but more compact, more refined. I was struck by a chill. But who? Carradine is in seclusion. Creel is in prison. Hargrave is awaiting trial. Exactly. Which means a new hand has picked up the tools. Holmes walked to the wall where the soot message remained. 2 bells, he read aloud. A signature. Or a warning. We returned to Baker Street in a haze of unease. Holmes barely spoke the rest of the evening, his hands busy drawing diagrams of the Pike flat and cross-referencing it with Carradine's original schematics. I brewed tea, knowing better than to interrupt. At midnight, he spoke. "Watson, I believe this is no copycat." "Then what?" He pointed to the bell. "This. The one Carradine sent." "No," he said grimly. "The one Carradine didn't send. Look here." He opened a new telegram that had arrived during our absence. I read it aloud. To Sherlock Holmes. Stop, I have not sent any package since my letter. Stop, I never built a second bell. Stop, something is wrong. Carradine, I felt a jolt run through me. Then who made the one we received? Holmes opened the bell. Hidden inside was a strip of paper, curled into the hollow cavity. It read, "The chime has not ended. Only begun. Tick. Tock. 2 bells ring. The third waits beneath." Holmes closed the casing and turned to me, his eyes gleaming. "We are dealing with someone new, Watson. Someone who understands the device. Someone who has improved it. A disciple. Holmes nodded. Perhaps. Or a rival. But either way, the clock has been rebuilt. And it is counting down. By the next morning, Holmes was in a state of fierce concentration. He had pinned a new map of London to the study wall, placing coloured tacks at every known site connected to the Vintimore device: Carradine's workshop, Creel's boarding house, Pike's flat, and of course, Vintimore Hall itself. "There's a pattern," he muttered. "A ring. Not merely symbolic, functional." "Functional in what way?" I asked. "Energy. Resonance. Whoever modified the clock understands more than mechanics. They're using placement, geography, even materials to amplify the effect." He paused. "It's not just about killing anymore. It's about influence." Holmes had long believed that certain forms of sound, when paired with electrical frequencies, could cause measurable disorientation, even hallucinations. He had written a monograph on the subject in 1891, which had been largely ignored until now. He turned to me. "We must go to Southwark." "What's in Southwark?" He pointed to the center of the circle. "The third bell." The location Holmes had deduced was an abandoned warehouse near the Thames, once part of a shipwright's yard. It was crumbling at the edges, its roof partially caved in, timbers dark with rot and soot. We arrived just after sunset, accompanied by Lestrade and 2 officers. Inside, the air hummed faintly. I could feel it before I heard it, a deep, low vibration that crawled under the skin. Holmes moved carefully through the gloom, lantern raised, eyes darting. "There," he whispered. Beneath a tarp, we uncovered a large wooden crate. Holmes pried it open. Inside was a machine, taller than Carradine's original clock, darker, sleeker, and terrifyingly complex. It pulsed with soft blue light. Coils snaked around a central column where 3 bells hung, each perfectly tuned. Wires trailed out of the floorboards, feeding unseen routes. Holmes stared at it with quiet awe. "This," he said, "is a cathedral of resonance." "What does it do?" He crouched to examine the coils. "If I'm correct, it broadcasts a pulse. Not to kill, necessarily, but to confuse. Manipulate. This device could throw an entire crowd into fear. Or frenzy. Then it's a weapon," Lestrade said. Holmes nodded. "Worse. It's a message. One that says, the ghost lives on." Suddenly, the machine powered up. The lights intensified. A soft chiming began, the first bell. "Step back!" Holmes shouted. From the far end of the warehouse, a figure emerged from the shadows. She wore a long grey coat and a veil, her posture rigid, hands clasped before her. "Miss Hargrave," I whispered. Holmes stepped forward. No, the figure removed the veil. It was not Lorna Hargrave. "You don't know me," the woman said. "But I knew him. I believed in him, in what he began. Holmes narrowed his eyes. Creel. She nodded. My brother. She stepped closer, her voice steady but burning. They laughed at him, called him mad. But he saw the truth. He saw how fear controlled people, and how we might take that control back. You're the engineer, Holmes said. You built this. I refined it, she said. Carradine built toys. I build sermons. The second bell rang. The hum grew sharper. I felt light-headed. You must shut it down, I said. People could die. She looked at me. Only those who live on stolen time. Holmes sprang into motion. With one clean strike from his cane, he shattered the side casing of the machine. Sparks flew. The woman screamed. Lestrade's officers rushed her. Holmes yanked a final switch, and the bells fell silent. The woman was taken into custody. Her name was Clara Creel, a former electrical assistant dismissed from the Royal Polytechnic for dangerous experiments. It had taken her months to reconstruct her brother's work. She admitted to killing Pike, calling it a test. The third bell was destroyed. I fear this won't be the last, Holmes said, watching the warehouse smolder in the morning light. But the design is gone, I said. Designs live in minds, Watson. And minds don't burn so easily. The dawn brought with it a cold clarity. Back at Baker Street, Holmes pored over the fragments of papers recovered from Clara Creel's belongings, sketches, journal entries, and cryptic notes detailing her brother's original work and her own modifications. Creel's obsession, Holmes mused, was not merely with mechanics, but with the human mind. He believed sound could bend perception, alter reality itself. And that's why the clock was more than a timepiece, I added. Holmes nodded. Yes. A weapon, a tool, and a message, all in one. But the more Holmes read, the darker his expression became. Watson, he said, there's a name here that haunts this entire affair. He pointed to a faded signature at the bottom of one journal page, our Elias Reeves. The steward, I said. We had his papers. Holmes shook his head slowly. These are his personal notes, hidden, secret. He wasn't just an observer but an accomplice. Or at least, he knew more than he admitted. Why would he hide this? To protect the family. Or perhaps himself. Holmes's gaze grew distant. This entire tragedy is a web spun long ago, each thread tugged by fear and greed. Determined to understand more, we returned to the now deserted Vintermore Hall. The once grand estate was cloaked in silence, the windows boarded, the gardens overgrown. Inside, dust motes drifted in shafts of pale light. Holmes carefully examined the walls and floorboards, searching for clues overlooked. In the library, behind a false panel, he discovered a hidden compartment containing a small box. Inside was a bundle of letters, yellowed and brittle. Holmes opened the first, To my dearest Elias, I fear the clock is more dangerous than we ever imagined. Percy's influence grows darker every day. Promise me, whatever happens, that you will protect Mary. Eugenia Wintermoor Holmes's eyes flickered. Mary Fallow's fate was sealed long before her death, he said. The letters revealed a series of clandestine meetings between Lady Eugenia and Elias Reeves, plans to conceal truths, silence dissenters, and preserve the family name. The final letter was unsigned but chilling. The clock's curse is not in its sound but in the silence it demands. Those who hear it must answer. Those who do not will never understand. Beware the third bell. Holmes folded the letters carefully. This is the key, Watson, he said. Not the machine, but the secrets buried beneath it. And those secrets, they have already claimed too many lives. London had settled into a cold grip of winter. The fog clung thickly to the streets, swallowing gas lamps and muffling footsteps. Holmes and I found ourselves increasingly cautious. The unseen enemy had shifted into the shadows. One evening, as I returned from an errand, I found Holmes deeply engrossed in the letters from Wintermoor. His face was pale, eyes sharp with urgency. "Watson, the pattern has become clear," he said. "The third bell is a warning, but to whom?" Before I could answer, there was a soft knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, carrying a small envelope. Holmes opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, hastily scrawled. "The bells toll not for the dead, but for the living. Seek the keeper of the clock. Time runs out." No signature. Holmes folded the note slowly. "This is a summons," he said. "From whom?" "That, Watson, is the question." The next day, Holmes arranged to meet Lestrade at an old pub near Fleet Street. The dim light flickered as the two men spoke in hushed tones. "I've heard rumors," Lestrade said quietly, "about a man known as the Keeper, someone who claims guardianship over the clock's remnants." Holmes nodded. "A figure shrouded in myth and secrecy. Do you believe this Keeper is real?" Holmes tapped the table. "If so, he might hold the answers we seek. Or the final piece of this deadly puzzle." That evening, Holmes and I ventured to a forgotten corner of London's East End, near the river docks. There, in a cramped, soot-stained workshop, we met an elderly man with piercing grey eyes and a weathered face. "I am Elias Reeves," he said simply. I stared, astonished. Holmes inclined his head. "You have much to explain." Reeves smiled faintly. "The clock's curse began with fear," he said. "But it may end with understanding. The bells are not just signals of death, they are calls for redemption." He showed us blueprints and diaries, revealing the clock's true purpose, a device designed to measure more than time, human emotion itself. The third bell, Reeves explained, was meant to awaken conscience, to force reckoning. Holmes listened intently. "Then why all the death?" "Because fear corrupts even the purest intentions," Reeves replied. and some refused to answer the call. Reeves led us through the cluttered workshop, where parts of clocks, gears, and strange electrical instruments lay strewn about. His eyes gleamed as he recounted the story behind the clock's creation. "It was never meant to kill," he said. Percy Ventimore wanted a way to control fear, to harness it and direct it, like a conductor leading an orchestra. But he underestimated its power. Holmes nodded gravely. And that curse was born when the clock's mechanism became an instrument of revenge and madness. Reeves's gaze fell to the floor. "I tried to stop it. I hid the blueprints. I warned those involved. But fear is persistent, and the bells kept tolling." He turned suddenly, eyes sharp. "You must understand, the final bell, the third bell, is not a tool for destruction but a test." "What kind of test?" I asked. "A choice. To face one's fears or be consumed by them." Holmes's mind raced. The idea of the third bell as a reckoning device gave new purpose to our investigation. "We must find the clock and stop this cycle," Holmes declared. "But it will require more than force, it demands courage." Reeves handed Holmes a small, intricate key, one that fit perfectly into the mechanism inside the clock. "The key to silence the bells," Reeves explained. "But beware, the clock's power feeds on hesitation." At dawn, we approached Ventimore Hall one last time. The air was thick with mist, and the house loomed like a sentinel guarding its secrets. Inside, the clock stood tall and ominous in the great hall. Its 3 bells gleamed in the dim light, poised to chime once again. Holmes inserted the key. The room vibrated with low humming. Suddenly, footsteps echoed behind us. Clara Creel appeared, freed from custody and desperate. "You don't understand," she cried. "The clock needs to ring. It's the only way to break the curse." Holmes faced her steadily. "No, Clara. It's the choice you must make, not the machine." With a twist of the key, the clock shuddered. The bells fell silent. A hush filled the room. For a moment, the silence in Ventimore Hall was absolute, thick as the fog outside. Then, slowly, Clara's shoulders sagged. She collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face. Holmes approached gently. "Fear has been your master, Clara," he said softly. "But it can also be your prisoner." Clara nodded, exhausted. Outside, the first light of dawn crept over the hills. The curse was broken, not by force, but by understanding. Back in London, the police secured the remnants of the clock and the blueprints. Clara Creel was taken back into custody, but with the promise of treatment and a chance at redemption. Holmes and I reflected on the case over one final night's tea. "This was no ordinary crime, Watson," Holmes said. "It was a journey through fear, power, and the human spirit. Do you think the curse is truly over?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Fear may never disappear. But as long as we face it head-on, the bells will only toll for those who refuse to listen." Weeks later, I received a small package at Baker Street. Inside was the original Carradine bell, silent, still. A note accompanied it, to remind us that time is a gift, not a weapon. I placed it on the mantelpiece, a quiet testament to a mystery solved and a darkness dispelled.